Now, if you've been following along closely, you can probably already see why what he says here is just totally wrong. This is an example of Hubbard oversimplifying complex issues, dumbing them down to make business people around the world look like a bunch of idiots, when in fact, they are faced with a myriad of difficult problems and decisions every day. Let's walk through an example from Hubbard himself, and I'll show you what I mean. There is trouble in the refreshment unit. There are 3 people in the unit. Doing a data analysis on the whole area gives us a number of outpoints. Then we assign these to employees A, B, and C who work in the unit and find B has the most outpoints. This indicates that the trouble in the refreshment unit is with B. B can be handled in various ways, such as training him on the duties of his job, his attendance, etc. Here, Hubbard is narrowing the target to an individual in the unit, a standard Scientology operating basis within their organizations. If something is going wrong, it's because someone working in the unit is messing things up. But what if that wasn't what was really going on? What if the trouble was with an outside supplier, or fluctuations in the stock market, or new legislation passed by the city council? In such an instance, this kind of analysis would be useless. Let's take a look at another point. This kind of analysis could not be done unless someone had a good idea of what the person or area is supposed to look like, or how they're supposed to act. It wouldn't do me much good trying to assign out points or plus points to a bunch of data related to a chemical treatment plant, because I have no idea what's good or bad in such a scene. I don't know which chemicals to use or in what proportions, how the machinery works, what the qualifications are for someone to run that machinery, etc., etc., etc. So Hubbard says that a great deal of familiarity with the area or people is necessary for someone to be able to evaluate the outpoints in it. And that leads us to the biggest problem of all with this supposed system of logic. Human beings are not objective machines. Our education, upbringing, moral values, and many other subconscious factors create biases or prejudices. There's not one person anywhere in the world who is free of these. The complexity of our knowledge and the influence of our emotions makes it impossible to view anything in a wholly unbiased or objective state. Objectivity is helped to the degree a person is not emotionally attached to something, but merely by the fact that a person is human and has had certain experiences or knows certain things will sway their judgment in one direction or another. What's even worse is that not only is total objectivity impossible, but research shows that we actually have a tendency to search for, interpret, favor, and even remember information in a way that confirms our pre-existing beliefs or ideas. This is so common and understood in cognitive science that there's a term for this. It's called confirmation bias. Hubbard's entire system is an exercise in confirmation bias, rather than a method of avoiding or negating confirmation bias. And that is why it is the most illogical system of thinking anyone could develop. Let me explain. Before someone can do a data and situation analysis, the evaluator must first establish what Hubbard calls the ideal scene for the situation being evaluated. The ideal scene gives a basis for comparison to determine whether something is an out point or a plus point. It is a statement, usually just a sentence or two at the most, that describes the perfect or ideal operating state or condition for what is being evaluated. For example, if one were evaluating a car manufacturing plant, the ideal scene might be something like a car plant producing a steady and viable stream of operational, well-running automobiles by well-trained and well-compensated production employees and executives, quickly correcting any deficiencies in said vehicles before allowing them to go off the line for delivery to car dealerships around the country. That sounds sensible enough. But what about when it comes to something a bit more controversial? What do you think L. Ron Hubbard would say the ideal scene for psychiatry would be? Well, before we work that out, here's what Hubbard said about psychiatry in November 1981. The two 19th century subjects, psychology and psychiatry, do not achieve any good results. On the contrary, they are destructive beyond belief. They make crackpots, sex pots, and vegetables when they do not outright kill. The greatest crime of our times is the use of psychology and psychiatry to teach little children in schools with them and manufacture crime and a whole world of immorality and unhappiness. So it's pretty clear that Hubbard thought psychiatry was worse than useless. He therefore directed his organizations to do everything possible to actively get rid of psychiatry as a subject. In 1969, the Church of Scientology even organized their own front group, the Citizens Commission on Human Rights, with the purpose of destroying psychiatry. Hubbard's clearly decided that the ideal scene of psychiatry is something like this. Psychiatry eradicated in every school or institution of higher learning, with psychiatrists either thrown in jail or otherwise nullified as medical professionals, and the public at large educated on the horrors of psychiatry so they will not support or endorse any use of psychiatry in any form around the world. Given this ideal scene, any information or situation concerning psychiatry would be evaluated accordingly. And that means that if something is beneficial to psychiatry, or somehow helps psychiatry to do its job better, or easier, or faster, it would be considered an out point. The only acceptable way of viewing information concerning psychiatry is to evaluate it against whether or not it helps destroy psychiatry. You see how this works? An ideal scene is not an objective, neutral statement. It wholly depends on a person's point of view based on their values and morals. If someone thinks all pharmaceutical drugs of any kind are destructive, then everything they see or hear or evaluate about it would be filtered through their confirmation bias. The same is true if someone thinks pharmaceuticals are beneficial or helpful. How about someone who thought all liberals were evil and must be destroyed? How would they evaluate a situation regarding the supposedly liberal Democratic Party? What about someone who had deep liberal values and who thought that all conservatives were bad? They would evaluate the same body of information about the same situation in a wholly opposite way to the conservative. So do you have a system of logic here, or do you have a system of deepening one's innate confirmation bias?